My children said, "Mom, you need to live less comfortably." I nodded. And that same day, I canceled 87 automatic payments. A week later, they called in panic. "Mom, what happened?" When they found out that I had been paying for their entire life. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I spent 67 years being useful to other people. That was simply what I knew how to do. My name is Margaret Eleanor Whitfield, and I was born in a small town in Ohio, raised by a woman who ironed her aprons and never once complained about anything. I married Harold when I was 22, had 3 children before I was 30, and buried him at 59 when the cancer took him faster than any of us expected. After Harold died, I did what women of my generation do. I kept going. I sold the big house in Columbus, moved into a sensible 2-bedroom condo in Scottsdale, Arizona, and built a quiet, comfortable life for myself on Harold's life insurance, my pension from 30 years of school administration, and the savings we'd accumulated together. I had my garden on the patio, my Thursday book club, my neighbor Dorothy who brought me lemon cake on my birthday. I was not rich by any measure, but I was steady. I was fine. My children were another story. Kevin, my oldest at 44, had always believed that the world owed him something. He'd been that way since he was 12, the first time he told me the other kids' parents bought them better things. He married Linda, a woman who shared his talent for spending money that didn't belong to them. And together they lived in a 5-bedroom house in Tempe that stretched their budget to the point of snapping. They had 3 children, Tyler, Madison, and the youngest, Braden, who was 7 and already had an iPad of his own. Kevin worked in business development, which as far as I could tell, meant he attended lunches and made very little money from them. My daughter, Susan, 41, was the one I had worried about least. She had gone to college, gotten a degree in marketing, seemed for years to be responsible. But somewhere in her 30s, she had unraveled. A divorce, a cross-country move to Phoenix, a new boyfriend named Greg, who she described as in-between opportunities. She rented an apartment that was, she told me, just a temporary situation. That was 4 years ago. My youngest, Daniel, 38, was perhaps the kindest of the 3, but kindness without ambition is just softness. He lived 20 minutes from me in Scottsdale and had been working on his music for the better part of a decade. He gave guitar lessons to teenagers twice a week. The rest of the time he was, as far as I could tell, simply present. For years, I told myself this was normal. Children need help. That's what parents are for. I paid Kevin's car insurance because Linda had let it lapse and the children needed to get to school. I covered Susan's gym membership because she said it kept her sane during the divorce, and then she'd simply never mentioned canceling it. I paid Daniel's streaming subscriptions, 3 of them, because he said he needed them for inspiration. I paid the family phone plan that had Kevin, Linda, Susan, and Daniel all on it because Harold had set it up years ago and it had simply continued. I paid for Kevin's kids' school photos. I helped with Linda's dental bill when her root canal cost more than expected. I bought Susan a new laptop when hers stopped working. I Venmo'd Daniel $200 for car repairs at least 4 times. I didn't count any of it. That was my first mistake. The comment happened on a Sunday in October. Kevin and Linda had driven over with the grandchildren for lunch, and I had cooked pot roast, which takes 3 hours and considerable effort for a 67-year-old woman with a bad hip. After we ate and the children ran off to watch something on their tablets, Kevin leaned back in his chair and looked around my condo with an expression I can only describe as evaluating. "Mom," he said, "you know, you really do live pretty comfortably here." I looked at him. "I'm sorry?" Linda smiled. That particular smile she had, pleasant on the surface and very sharp underneath. What Kevin means is, with your pension and Harold's insurance money, you have quite a cushion. Some people might say it's more than one person needs. Susan had arrived by then and was standing in my kitchen doorway with a glass of wine. She nodded slowly, as if this were a conversation they had planned. "The kids are growing, Mom. Things are expensive." "I know things are expensive," I said. "We just think," Kevin continued, choosing his words with the careful deliberateness of someone who had rehearsed, "that you could live a little less comfortably. Scale back. You don't need all of this." I nodded. "I see." I smiled. I refilled their coffee cups. I sent them home with leftover pot roast and kissed the grandchildren on their foreheads. And that night, sitting at my kitchen table in the quiet, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something colder and more precise than anger. The feeling you get when something you suspected for a long time is finally confirmed. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. I hadn't really looked, at my automatic payments in years. The number that appeared on my screen that night was $4,340. That was what left my account every single month in automatic payments. Quietly, invisibly, the way water drains from a bathtub when you're not watching. I sat very still for a long time. I went through every line item slowly, writing each one down on a yellow legal pad the way I used to take notes at staff meetings when I was assistant principal at Jefferson Elementary. Column by column, recipient, amount, date initiated, last reviewed. The family phone plan, $287 a month. 4 lines, mine, Kevin's, Susan's, Daniel's. Kevin and Linda also had a separate line for Tyler, which somehow ended up on my account 2 years ago when Kevin said it would just be for a month while he sorted out his own plan. That month had become 26 months. Kevin's auto insurance, $189 a month. This had started when Linda's driving record made their rates unaffordable. Temporary, Kevin had said. That was 3 years ago. Susan's gym membership, $54 a month to a fitness center in Phoenix she had, I would later discover, stopped visiting 8 months earlier. Daniel's streaming services, 3 separate subscriptions, $47 a month total. Kevin's kids' lunch accounts at their school. I had set up automatic deposits of $150 a month total. I had done this during the pandemic, when Kevin said things were tight. Things had apparently remained tight. Linda's Amazon Prime account, which I had been added to, or rather, which had been added to me, when Kevin mentioned it was expiring, $15 a month. A subscription to an online learning platform that I did not recognize and had never signed up for. $29 a month. When I searched my email, I found it had been initiated from Kevin's IP address 18 months ago. Susan's electricity bill, which I had offered to help with once during a particularly hot July 2 years ago, and which had quietly continued to be billed to my card. $96 a month. There were others, smaller ones, a grocery delivery service that I had never used, linked to what appeared to be Susan's address. A subscription box, gourmet snacks, the statement read. That was also not mine. By the time I finished the list, it was past midnight. I had filled 2 pages of the legal pad. The total came to $1,847 per month in payments that were not for me. Not one subscription I'd listed was for anything I used or received. Every dollar was flowing silently out of my account and into my children's lives, and they had not said a word about it in years. Not a thank you, not a mention. And today, they had sat at my table eating my pot roast and told me I was living too comfortably. I sat back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. Was I afraid? Yes, but not of them. I was afraid of what it meant about me, that I had allowed this to go on so long without noticing, without questioning, that I had let myself become an ATM that cooked Sunday dinners and never pushed back. Harold would have caught it years ago. Harold had always been better at the numbers. But Harold wasn't here. I was. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat back down at the table. I turned the legal pad to a fresh page and I wrote 2 words at the top. What next? The fear didn't go away, but something else came in alongside it. Something purposeful. I had spent 45 years in school administration, and the thing that work teaches you, if nothing else, is how to solve a problem without letting the problem see you working on it. I needed to understand the full picture before I did anything. I needed to see every account, every subscription, every place my money was going without my active knowledge. And then, carefully, legally, with no drama, I needed to stop it. I started a list on the next page. Every automatic payment, cancel date, method, expected response from each child. I knew my children. I knew how Kevin would react, with volume and accusation. I knew Susan would cry. I knew Daniel would be confused and then hurt. I accounted for all of it. I did not plan to argue with them. I did not plan to explain myself in advance. I would simply act, and I would be prepared for what came after. By 2 a.m, I had my first plan. It was quiet and methodical, which is exactly how I like things. I closed the legal pad, washed my teacup, and went to bed. For the first time in years, I slept soundly. I didn't move immediately. That was intentional. I had learned from 30 years of school administration that the worst mistakes are made in the 48 hours after a decision, when emotion is still close to the surface and you're tempted to act before you're ready. So I gave myself 1 week. I spent that week gathering information. I called my bank's fraud and billing department on a Tuesday morning while Daniel was at a guitar lesson and couldn't drop by unexpectedly. I asked a very pleasant woman named Cheryl to walk me through every recurring charge on my debit card and both credit cards going back 3 years. I sat at my kitchen table with the legal pad and I wrote everything down. Cheryl seemed slightly alarmed by my thoroughness. I told her I was doing a financial review, and she accepted that without further question. The fraud department flagged something I had missed entirely. A recurring $29 charge to an educational platform that had been initiated not from my devices, but from a device registered to Kevin's home address. He had simply added my card as the payment method. This was not, technically, authorized use. Cheryl used that phrase carefully. Not authorized use. She told me I was within my rights to dispute the charges retroactively and recover up to 18 months of payments. I told her I would think about it. I wrote down her employee number. The following Thursday, I went to see my attorney, a man named Robert Finch, who had helped Harold and me with our wills and the house sale years ago. I drove myself to his office in North Scottsdale, a clean, glass-fronted building near a dry cleaning shop. And I sat down across from him and told him what I had found. Robert listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "Margaret, do you want to take legal action? Or do you want to protect yourself going forward?" "Both," I said, "but the second one first." He nodded and pulled out a legal pad of his own. We spent 90 minutes going through my financial accounts, my will, the life insurance beneficiary designations, the condo deed. By the end of it, I had a clear picture of something I had not fully reckoned with before. Under the current will, which Harold and I had written together 15 years ago, my entire estate was divided equally between Kevin, Susan, and Daniel. There were no conditions, no structure, no trust, just a straight division. "That can be changed," Robert said simply. "I know," I said, "but not yet. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." I drove home with a folder of documents on the passenger seat and a kind of focused clarity I hadn't felt in years. It reminded me of the feeling I used to get at the start of a new school year. Everything organized, everything ahead of you, nothing wasted yet. That same evening, Kevin called. "Hey, Mom," he said. His voice was slightly too casual, the way it gets when he's working towards something. "How are you doing?" "Fine," I said. "I had a good day." "Yeah? What did you do?" I paused just long enough to notice the question. Kevin did not usually ask what I did with my days. "Errands," I said. "The usual." "Oh," a beat. "Linda and I were thinking we might come by Saturday. Bring the kids." "That would be lovely," I said warmly. "Let me know what time." After I hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. He was checking on me. I didn't know how he could have sensed anything. I had told no one, done nothing visible yet. But Kevin had always had a particular radar for when money was in question. It had served him until now. The next morning, I received the bank's formal statement by email. 18 months of that unauthorized $29 charge, a total of $522 that I could dispute. But more than that, the document confirmed, in writing, what I had only known informally the night at my kitchen table. The amounts, the dates, the merchant names, my children's lives, itemized. I printed it. I put it in the folder Robert had given me. I labeled the folder with a piece of masking tape and wrote on it, in my very ordinary handwriting, "Household Review." It was the most accurate thing I'd ever written. I chose a Wednesday for the cancellations. There was nothing particularly strategic about Wednesday. It simply fell far enough from the weekend that there would be no immediate family gathering to navigate, and early enough in the billing cycle that most of the payments wouldn't process before I could stop them. I sat at my kitchen table at 8:30 in the morning with my laptop, my legal pad, my reading glasses, and a large cup of coffee. I had written out the cancellations in order, largest to smallest, most impactful to least. It took me 3 hours and 40 minutes. Some of them were simple, a phone call, a button on a website. Others required me to call customer service and explain, patiently, that I was the account holder and I wished to remove the additional lines. The family phone plan took the longest. I was on hold for 22 minutes before reaching a representative who confirmed that, yes, as the primary account holder, I could remove any or all of the additional lines at my discretion. I removed them all except my own. By noon, I had canceled 87 recurring charges. I saved the confirmation emails to a folder on my desktop labeled Review Complete. I made a cup of soup. I sat by the window and looked at the patio garden and the small cactus that had started to bloom, and I felt the particular satisfaction of a task completed. The calls started on Friday. Daniel was first. "Mom, my Netflix isn't working. Did you change your password?" His voice was puzzled, not yet alarmed. "I reviewed my subscriptions," I said. "I removed some things I wasn't using." "Oh, but I use that. I can set up my own account. That sounds like a good plan, sweetheart." There was a pause. "Okay, yeah, I'll sort it out." He hung up, uncertain, but not yet angry. That was Daniel. By Saturday evening, Kevin called. And Kevin was not Daniel. "Mom." His voice had that particular flatness it got when he was containing something. "My phone stopped working. The kids' school lunch accounts are showing a balance of 0, and Linda's Amazon Prime won't let her check out. What is going on?" "I did a financial review," I said, the same words I'd used with the bank. "A financial?" He stopped. "You canceled our phone plan? Mom, we have 3 kids. We need those phones. I use that for work." "Kevin," I said calmly, "your name is not on my account. You were a courtesy addition, I removed the courtesy. The silence that followed was several seconds long. Then his voice shifted, and the containment dropped. "This is because of what I said at lunch, isn't it? Mom, I was just making a point." "You made your point clearly," I said. "I heard it." "You can't just— We depend on some of those things. You knew we depended on them." "I did know that," I said. "That's the issue." He tried for another 20 minutes. He moved through frustration into accusation. I was being cruel. I was doing this to punish the grandchildren. I had no idea what their expenses were like. Didn't I want to be part of the family? When none of that moved me, he put Linda on the phone. Linda was icier and more precise. She used the phrase elder behavior in a way that was clearly meant to imply something, though she didn't finish the sentence. I wrote it down on my legal pad after I hung up. Susan called Sunday morning and cried. She said she didn't understand why I was doing this, that she'd always been there for me, that the electricity payment had been my offer and she hadn't asked for it. That last part was almost true, and I credit her for it. "You're right," I told her. "I offered. And now I've reviewed the arrangement." By Monday, all three had called Robert Finch's office. His paralegal called me to let me know. I thanked her and asked her to document the contact. I took the rest of that week for myself. I drove to Sedona on Thursday and walked a trail I knew. Not a hard one. Just 2 miles through Red Rock that Harold and I used to do together. I ate lunch at a cafe with a porch and a view of the mountains. I didn't check my phone until the drive home. The exhaustion I felt was not weakness. It was the reasonable fatigue of someone who had just done something that needed doing. I had earned the rest. Kevin's next approach came in the form of a gift basket. It arrived on a Tuesday. A large wicker basket wrapped in cellophane with a card that read, in Linda's handwriting, "Mom, we love you. We hope we can talk when you're ready. Kevin, Linda, and the kids." Inside, a jar of artisanal honey, 3 types of crackers, a small cheese, and a candle that smelled of cedar. It was, I'll admit, nicely put together. Linda had a talent for presentation. I set it on the counter and looked at it for a while. Then I wrote them a thank you note, a proper one, on the stationery I keep in the desk drawer, and mailed it the next morning. The note said, "Thank you for the lovely basket. The cheese is excellent. Love, Mom." Nothing more. Susan sent flowers 2 days later, a bouquet of yellow tulips with a note. "Just thinking of you." No mention of the electricity bill, no mention of the gym membership, just flowers. Yellow tulips had been my favorite since she was a little girl. She knew that. I put them in the blue vase on the windowsill, and they were genuinely beautiful there. Daniel came by in person on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced. He sat at my kitchen table and looked at me the way he had as a small boy when he'd broken something and wasn't sure how to say it. "Mom," he said, "I'm not angry. I just want to understand." "What do you want to understand?" I asked. I set a glass of water in front of him. "Why now?" he said. "Did something happen? Are you okay?" "I'm very well," I said. "I did a financial review, and I found some things that needed correcting." "Was it because of what Kevin said? At lunch?" "It was because of what I found," I said, "when I looked." He sat with that for a while. "He was the most honest of them, Daniel." He said quietly, "I should have been paying for my own subscriptions. I know that." "Yes," I said, "you should have." He left without incident. He looked sad, which I felt, because I loved Daniel. But I did not change my mind. The cold calm people talk about. That distance that comes after a decision is made. I had that. It was not indifference. I still loved them. It was more like the feeling after a surgery. Something has been done. It cannot be undone. And the body is simply adjusting. What I needed now was someone outside the family, someone who would not try to adjust my position. Dorothy came over on a Friday evening. Dorothy McGuire, my neighbor, 71 years old, a retired nurse who had raised 4 children on her own after her husband left in 1987 and had never once, as far as I could tell, taken a single thing from anyone she hadn't agreed to give. I told her everything. I showed her the legal pad. I showed her the folder. She listened without interrupting, the way nurses learn to do. When I finished, she said, "How much a month?" $18.47, I said, not counting the one-off payments. She set down her wine glass. "Margaret," she said, "you have to be done apologizing for this." "I'm not apologizing," I said. "You will be," she said. "The moment it gets hard, you'll start to feel like you should explain yourself. Don't. You owe them exactly 1 sentence. I reviewed my finances. That's it." I wrote that down. Dorothy was worth every piece of lemon cake she'd ever brought me. She stayed until 9. We talked about things other than my children, about a book she was reading, about the mockingbird that had taken up residence near her parking spot, about whether either of us wanted to take a trip somewhere warm in February, somewhere new. By the time she left, I felt steadier than I had in weeks. Not happy, exactly. Not yet, but positioned. Kevin suggested a family dinner. He framed it as an olive branch, his words, in a text message, and said he just wanted everyone to sit down together and get on the same page. He picked the restaurant, a mid-priced Italian place in Scottsdale we'd been to before. Neutral ground, he called it. I agreed to go because I believed I should hear what they had to say. I also went because I wanted them to see me, calm, unhurried, entirely myself, and understand that the version of me they had been dealing with for years was not the only version there was. The restaurant had red-checked tablecloths and smelled of garlic and warm bread. Kevin and Linda were already seated when I arrived. Susan came in 2 minutes after me. Daniel arrived last, looking slightly disheveled. They had, I noticed, all dressed slightly more carefully than usual. This was a presentation. Kevin wore the blue jacket he saved for job interviews and parent-teacher nights. Linda had her hair done. Even Susan, who usually dressed casually, wore a blazer. They had prepared for this the way you prepare for a negotiation, not a reconciliation. Kevin ordered wine for the table without asking me. He was warm, almost festive, telling a story about Tyler's soccer game, asking about my hip, saying the garden photos I'd posted looked wonderful. Linda smiled steadily and said very little. Susan seemed tense. Daniel looked at his bread. After the appetizers, Kevin set down his fork and became serious. "Mom," he said, "we've been doing a lot of thinking, as a family, and we want to be honest with you." "Please be," I said. "We were hurt," he said. "Not about the money, I want to be clear about that. We were hurt because it felt like you did this without talking to us first, without giving us the chance to have a conversation." "I see," I said. "Family communicates," Linda said precisely. "We've always communicated." Susan leaned forward. "Mom, we understand you feel like you were being taken advantage of. And if we gave that impression, that was never the intent. We thought we were all part of the same unit. That's how we saw it." "A unit," I said. "Yes." Kevin nodded. "Families share. That's normal. What you did, it was a shock. It felt like a punishment." "I can see why it felt that way," I said. Kevin looked slightly relieved, as though he thought I was softening. He pressed forward. "What we'd like to propose is, look, maybe we overstepped with some things. Maybe we should have been more aware. We'd like to sit down and work out something that's fair to everyone. An arrangement." "An arrangement?" There it was. I had expected something like this, had written it on my legal pad as a likely outcome when I imagined this dinner in advance. What I had not predicted exactly was how rehearsed it would feel in person. Every sentence landing in sequence, like a presentation they had all reviewed beforehand. Linda's calm, Susan's wounded lean, Kevin's careful pivot from warmth to seriousness. It was coordinated. They had talked about this at length, without me. "What kind of arrangement?" I asked. Linda spoke. "A monthly amount. Something reasonable that you're comfortable with, that we can all agree on, so there's no ambiguity. It would be structured, documented, completely transparent." She said it smoothly, the way she said most things. "We'd know what to expect. You'd know what you were committing to." I looked at her. "You'd like me to agree to send you money every month. A contribution," Kevin said quickly, "to the family." The table was quiet for a moment. "No," I said. Kevin's expression didn't change immediately, but something shifted behind it. "Mom, I've reviewed my finances," I said. "That review is complete. I'm not making new arrangements." "You're not even willing to discuss it?" Susan's voice had gone thin. "After everything we came here to say?" "I heard everything you said," I told her. "I'm grateful you came." Kevin set his napkin on the table. The warmth was entirely gone now. He moved through frustration into accusation. I was being cruel. I was doing this to punish the grandchildren. I had no idea what their expenses were like. Didn't I want to be part of the family? When none of that moved me, he put Linda on the phone. Linda was icier and more precise. She used the phrase elder behavior in a way that was clearly meant to imply something, though she didn't finish the sentence. I wrote it down on my legal pad after I got home. "This is not reasonable behavior, Mom. You're isolating yourself financially from your own family. That's not—" A doctor would have questions about that. It was a careful threat, the way he said it. A doctor would have questions. The implication being that my behavior could be framed as a symptom of something, that my competence could be questioned. I felt the fear, quick and cold, move through me like a current. But behind the fear was something else. Something I hadn't expected to feel so clearly in a restaurant booth under warm lighting with a half-eaten plate of pasta in front of me. It was certainty. The particular certainty that comes not from confidence exactly, but from documentation, from Robert's folder, from 90 minutes of careful notes, from Cheryl's employee number, written in the margin of a legal pad that was sitting right now in my filing cabinet. I was 67 years old and completely in possession of my mind, and I had the paperwork to prove it. "Kevin," I said quietly, "I have documentation of every payment I've made to or for each of you over the past 3 years. I have a copy of an unauthorized charge to my account from your home address. I have retained an attorney. If you'd like to have a discussion about my mental fitness, I'd suggest you speak with him first." He stared at me. Linda touched his arm. "We should go," she said. They went. Susan followed without saying another word. Daniel lingered a moment at the door, looked back at me, and said, quietly enough that only I could hear, "I'm sorry, Mom." Then he left too. I sat alone at the table and ate my pasta, which was very good. The waiter looked at me with barely concealed curiosity. I left a 20% tip and drove myself home. In the condo, I sat on the couch with the lights low and let the fear have its full minute. It was real. The threat Kevin had made was real, even if it wouldn't hold. The idea that they might try to have me declared unfit, that they might involve doctors or courts or social workers. That was not nothing. I knew how those processes worked. I had seen them happen to other women, older women, women without attorneys or documentation, or a neighbor like Dorothy who could testify to their absolute clarity of mind. The fear was appropriate. I let it run its course. But the fear, when I sat with it, didn't hollow me out. It arranged itself into something I could use, into certainty, into the absolute knowledge that I had made the right decision, and that I needed to see it through completely, without hesitation, without softening. I called Robert Finch's office the next morning and left a voicemail documenting exactly what Kevin had said at dinner. Robert called me back the following week and said he thought it was time to be more formal. He had sent a letter, certified return receipt, to each of the 3 children. The letter was not aggressive. It simply established, in the careful language of legal correspondence, that I was represented by counsel in all matters related to my financial accounts and estate, that I was of sound mind and full legal capacity, that any attempt to challenge my financial decisions or mental competency without medical basis would be treated as harassment, and that all future contact regarding financial matters should be directed to his office. It was 2 pages. It was very clear. Kevin called me immediately after receiving it. The call lasted 8 seconds. I heard him begin to speak, heard his voice already climbing toward something, and said, "Please call Robert Finch's office." Then I hung up. He called back twice. I didn't answer. The meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon in Robert's conference room. A spare, organized room with good light and a long table that seated 8. There were water glasses already set out and a box of tissues that Robert's paralegal placed at the center of the table with the practiced neutrality of someone who had seen many of these meetings. Robert had suggested it. I had agreed. Kevin, Susan, and Daniel were invited. They all came, which I had expected. Kevin because he thought he could win the room. Susan because she couldn't stay away from conflict. Daniel because he was trying to understand. Kevin brought Linda. Robert noted her presence and said she was welcome to observe, but that, as she was not a party to any of the accounts or the estate, she would not be participating formally. Linda sat down and arranged her face into its smoothest configuration. Robert began by distributing copies of a single document, the summary of my automatic payments over the previous 3 years, dates, amounts, recipients, authorization status. It was 12 pages, clean, tabbed, printed on the firm's letterhead. Kevin looked at it for a moment and said, "This is a document you prepared. It could say anything." "The figures come directly from bank records," Robert said. "Your mother has the originals." I placed the folder on the table, the bank statements, the confirmation emails, the fraud department notation, Cheryl's employee number, written in blue ink in the margin of my legal pad. Susan looked at the gym membership line and went very still. I watched her face as she read the date, 8 months before I canceled the payment. 8 months of a membership she had stopped using, charged quietly to my account, never mentioned. I did not say anything. The document said it for me. "This subscription was canceled 8 months before you removed the payment?" Robert said, looking at her. "You were no longer using it, but the charge was continuing to your mother's account?" "I forgot to notify her," Susan said. Her voice was almost inaudible. "You forgot," I said. "It wasn't a question." Kevin tried a different direction. "This is all minor stuff, oversights. You're acting like we did something criminal." "The $29 monthly charge to the educational platform," Robert said, "was initiated from a device registered to your home address, Mr. Whitfield. Over 18 months, that's $522 that was charged to your mother's account without her authorization. That is, by definition, unauthorized use of a credit card." Kevin opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I meant to. It was supposed to be temporary. I was going to. Kevin." Robert's tone was not unkind, but it was final. He waited. Kevin closed his mouth. The silence in the room was useful. I had learned over 30 years of school administration that silence in a formal setting is almost always more powerful than words. When an assistant principal goes quiet during a meeting, people fill the silence with exactly what they're most afraid of. Kevin was filling it with something. I could see it in the way he was looking at the table. "I'm not pressing charges," I said clearly. I looked at all three of them when I said it. "I'm not interested in punishment. I am interested in being accurate about what happened." Daniel had been sitting quietly with his hands folded on the table. He looked up at me and said, "Mom, I really didn't know how much it added up to. I genuinely didn't." "I know," I said. "I didn't either until I looked." "Then why didn't you just say something?" Susan said, and there was genuine feeling in her voice now, not strategy. "Why didn't you just tell us it was too much?" "Because I shouldn't have had to," I said. "You are adults. You should have been paying your own bills. I should never have been paying them to begin with." Kevin's composure had been deteriorating throughout the meeting. He'd gone through several phases: authoritative, then reasonable, then skeptical, then dismissive. And now he'd reached something underneath all of them. Real anger, unmanaged, the kind that doesn't care anymore about what room it's in or who's watching. "You know what this is?" he said. "This is you punishing us for one comment at lunch. One comment, and you've turned it into this legal proceeding." "Kevin." Robert's voice was quiet but firm. "You're threatening your own children with a lawyer because of one conversation." "It wasn't one conversation," I said. My voice was steady. It surprised even me how steady it was. "It was 3 years of automatic payments you never asked me about, never mentioned, never offered to take over. And when I looked at my finances and realized what was happening, you sat in a restaurant and told me I was exhibiting the kind of behavior a doctor should question." The room went quiet. "That's what changed this," I said. "Not the comment about my comfort. The suggestion that I was unfit to manage my own money, when the only money being mismanaged was mine, by you." Kevin said nothing. He looked at his hands. There was nothing left to say, and he knew it. The documentation was on the table. The attorney was in the room. The woman sitting across from him was not the mother who had quietly paid his insurance for 3 years without asking why he hadn't fixed his wife's driving record. Linda was still. Her practiced pleasantness had nowhere to go, no surface left to adhere to. "I've had the will reviewed," I continued. "I've made some changes." I didn't specify what the changes were. Robert had advised me not to. Not yet. Not here. Let the uncertainty do its work. Kevin looked up. For the first time in a long time, I saw something in his face that wasn't calculation. It was fear. Clean, unguarded. The kind you see in a person who has just realized the game is different from what they thought it was. "What kind of changes?" he said. "The kind that reflect the current situation," I said. Robert closed the meeting shortly after. He walked the three of them out while I gathered my folder. In the parking lot, through the glass door, I could see Kevin and Linda standing by their car, talking to each other in low, intense voices. Susan was on her phone. Daniel sat on a bench near the entrance and stared at the ground. He was the only one not in motion, not scrambling. He was simply sitting with it. I drove home in the late afternoon light with the windows down and the radio playing something old and pleasant, a song I half remembered from a long time ago. The will, as Robert and I restructured it, was not vindictive. I want to be clear about that. I did not disinherit my children out of anger. I made decisions that were financially rational and morally honest, and I made them with the same careful attention I'd given every other aspect of my life. The same attention Harold had deserved, that the children at Jefferson Elementary had deserved, that I had been extending to my own family for 40 years without ever quite pointing it in my own direction. Kevin and Linda's portion was restructured into a trust. They would receive nothing as a lump sum. Instead, the trust would distribute funds annually, a moderate amount, with the conditions that it could not be used to service existing debt, that a financial accounting be provided to the trustee each year, and that the funds could be withheld at the trustee's discretion if they were found to be misused. The trustee was not me. It was a professional firm Robert recommended, with no personal connection to any of us. Cold, impartial, and impossible to charm. Susan's portion was held similarly in a trust, with Daniel named as a secondary beneficiary in the event she did not meet certain basic conditions, that she be employed or enrolled in a qualifying program, or able to demonstrate financial self-sufficiency at the time of distribution. Robert had drafted this carefully. It would hold. He'd reviewed comparable arrangements and was confident in its structure. Daniel's portion was structured differently. He had been honest with me. He had acknowledged his part without deflection, without blame shifting, without arriving at my table with a coordinated presentation. His share was held in a straightforward trust with a single trustee. Not a firm, but a person he and I both respected. Dorothy. Dorothy had agreed with characteristic directness. Fine, I won't let him waste it. I believed her completely. I also made a change that had nothing to do with my children. I transferred a portion of my assets into an annuity that would generate income for me directly, immune from any future attempt to dispute my estate or interfere with my finances. Robert had suggested it. I had agreed immediately. It meant that regardless of what any of them attempted, legally, medically, emotionally, I was financially protected in the present, not just at the end. Kevin attempted, in the weeks that followed, to engage Robert in what he called a mediation process. He sent 2 letters. The letters were written in a tone that managed to be simultaneously wounded and threatening, which I found almost impressive as a rhetorical achievement. Robert responded to each one professionally and without concession. Kevin then spoke to another attorney, who apparently told him that contesting the will of a competent adult with documented legal transactions and professional representation was not a strong position. Kevin did not pursue it further. He was many things, but he was not foolish enough to spend money on a lawsuit he was going to lose. Linda sent me a card in December. It was a Christmas card, a formal one, a picture of a snowy landscape with a printed sentiment inside. She had signed both their names in her careful, even handwriting. There was nothing personal in it, no warmth and no hostility either. Just the card, just the signature. I placed it on the mantel with the others and felt nothing particular about it. It was, in its own way, honest. It was exactly what our relationship had become. Susan called me twice in November. The first time, she tried once more to revisit the restaurant conversation, to reframe it as a misunderstanding on all sides, to suggest that we had both contributed to a pattern that had gone unaddressed for too long. I listened for 4 minutes, which I think was generous, and then said, "Susan, I love you. The financial decisions are made. I'm not going to reopen them." She hung up. The second time, she called just to talk. No agenda, no approach, just her voice and the ordinary small news of her week. We spoke for 40 minutes about her job, about a show she was watching, about nothing much. It was, cautiously, a start. I chose to treat it as one. Daniel came for Thanksgiving. Just the 2 of us. I cooked a small turkey, and he brought sweet potato pie from a bakery he liked, still warm in its box, smelling of cinnamon. We ate at the kitchen table with the good placemats and the candles I didn't usually bother with for just myself, but took out this time because it seemed right. We talked about Harold, about a road trip Daniel vaguely wanted to take along the coast, about the cactus on my patio that was still blooming past its usual season. He didn't ask about the will, he didn't ask about the money. He helped me wash the dishes and dried them carefully, the way Harold used to. Before he left, standing in the doorway with his jacket on and the November air cool behind him, he said, "Mom, I'm going to pay for my own subscriptions from now on." "I know you will," I said. He smiled, a small one. "I should have been doing it this whole time." "Yes," I said, "but now you will. That's what matters." I closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway for a moment. The condo was quiet. The kitchen smelled of turkey and rosemary. The cactus was visible through the patio door, small and patient in the evening light, blooming without anyone asking it to. I had not given anything away. I had not softened the terms. I had not been cruel, but I had been final. And it had held, all of it, every decision, every quiet Wednesday morning cancellation, every folder tab, every certified letter. It had all held. February came and Dorothy and I took that trip we'd talked about. We went to Savannah, Georgia, a city I had always wanted to see and never quite made the time for. We stayed at a small inn near the historic district, walked the squares in the mornings before it got warm, ate shrimp and grits at a restaurant on the river, and went to a gallery that was showing botanical illustrations I found quietly beautiful. Dorothy bought a print of a blue heron for her hallway. I bought a small watercolor of a live oak draped in Spanish moss and had it shipped to the condo. I slept 8 hours a night. I read on the porch of the inn in the afternoons. I did not check my phone until after breakfast. When I returned to Scottsdale, I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center, something I'd thought about for years and deferred because there was always something else to manage. The class met on Tuesday mornings. The other students were mostly in their 60s and 70s, and the instructor, a brisk woman named Paola, had no patience for hesitation. She told me my first painting was ambitious in theory and handed me a thinner brush. I went back the next week and the week after that. I also met with a financial advisor, a woman named Claire, who Robert recommended, who specialized in retirement planning and was direct in a way I found refreshing. She reviewed everything, restructured my investment allocations, and set me up with a spending plan that was, as she put it, generous to yourself. I was, it turned out, comfortable. More than comfortable. Harold had been a careful saver, and I had been a careful spender. And together, over 40 years, we had done something real. I had simply not been attending to it. I attended to it now. Kevin and Linda's situation, as I came to understand it gradually through Daniel, through small mentions in Susan's calls, was complicated. The house in Tempe turned out to be more leverage than I'd known. A second mortgage taken out years ago, apparently for renovations that hadn't added much value. Kevin's business development position ended in the spring when the company he worked for restructured. He took a different job, a more junior one, with a longer commute. Linda returned to work for the first time in 8 years. She had a background in HR, which I had genuinely not known. The adjustment was, by Daniel's telling, difficult. I did not feel satisfaction about this exactly, but I did not feel guilt either. Kevin and Linda had been constructing a life on a foundation that partly included my money, and when I removed my portion, the foundation had shown its actual dimensions. That was information they needed. Susan got a promotion in the spring. She was good at her work, I'd always known that. And it was easier to be good at your work when your rent was actually your own responsibility. She called me more often after the promotion, and the calls were different. Less careful, less angled. She told me about a trip she was thinking of taking. She asked about my watercolor class with what seemed like genuine curiosity. I told her about Paula and the thinner brush, and she laughed. Daniel played a small concert at a venue downtown in April. An actual ticketed event, not a bar show. A real venue with a stage and lighting. He sent me a ticket. Dorothy and I went together. He was good. Better than I'd realized, honestly. He had been practicing seriously, he told me after, because he'd had to rethink his financial situation and had decided that if music was what he was going to do, he was going to do it properly. He'd picked up more students. He was making ends meet on his own. After the concert, the three of us, Daniel, Dorothy, and I, went to a diner nearby and had pie and coffee and sat in a booth for 2 hours. Daniel told a story about a student who had tried to teach him a chord, very seriously, and gotten it wrong. Dorothy nearly spilled her coffee, laughing. I sat in that booth and looked at the two of them and thought, this is what I was protecting. Not money, not principle exactly. This, the ability to be a person, clearly and without apology, surrounded by people who were present because they chose to be. My watercolor of the live oak hung in the hallway. The cactus on the patio bloomed a second time, which Paula told me was a sign of good conditions. I turned 68 in June, and Dorothy brought lemon cake, and Daniel came by in the afternoon, and Susan sent flowers. Pink peonies this time, not yellow tulips, something new. And Kevin sent a card that was brief but signed by all of them, including the grandchildren. It was not everything. It was not what I had imagined a family was supposed to be, but it was real, and real, I had decided, was enough. Real was, in fact, quite a lot. I learned at 67 years old that love is not the same thing as paying someone else's bills without being asked. I had confused the two for a long time. What I recovered when I stopped confusing them was not just money. It was myself. If you are reading this and recognizing your own family in any part of it, I want to say, the discomfort of changing things is temporary. The cost of never changing them is not. What would you have done? Would you have canceled all 87 payments? Or would you have kept quiet and hoped something changed on its own? Leave your answer in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know. And if this story meant something to you, share it. Someone in your life might need to hear it. Thank you for listening.